It is the year 1258 AD, and the greatest city in the world is about to be erased from history. Baghdad, the heart of the Abbasid Caliphate, the most powerful and advanced civilization of its time, is under siege. For 5 centuries, the Abbasids dominated the Islamic world, ruling an empire stretching from Spain to India. They built a society where science, philosophy, and art flourished. But today, all of it burns. The Mongols, the most feared warriors on earth, have broken through the city's gates. The House of Wisdom, where scholars preserved the greatest knowledge of humanity, is being reduced to ashes. The waters of the Tigris River turn black with ink from countless destroyed manuscripts. And soon the Abbasid Caliph al-Mustasim, the last ruler of Baghdad, will be executed. What went wrong? How did the greatest empire of the medieval world rise to dominance, only to fall so catastrophically? Today we uncover the story of the Abbasid Caliphate, from revolution and golden age to betrayal and destruction. This is the story of how an empire that once changed the world lost everything. It is 747 AD, and the Islamic world stands on the edge of revolution. The Umayyad Caliphate, which has ruled for nearly a century, is on the verge of collapse. Across the empire, from Spain to Central Asia, a storm is brewing. In the streets of Kufa and Merv, whispers of rebellion spread like wildfire, and in the shadows, a new force is preparing to strike. This force is led by the Abbasid family, a dynasty claiming direct descent from the Prophet Muhammad's uncle, Abbas. For years, they have plotted in secret, gathering allies from the marginalized and the forgotten, those who felt betrayed by the Umayyads. Tonight, in the deserts of Khorasan, the final uprising begins. The Abbasid Revolution will shake the Islamic world to its core and change the course of history forever. Historian Fred Donner, a leading scholar in early Islamic history and author of Narratives of Islamic Origins, The Beginnings of Islamic Historical Writing, writes, "The Abbasid Revolution was more than a mere transfer of power. It marked a profound shift in the socio-political structure of the Islamic world, with a new emphasis on egalitarianism and inclusivity. To understand why the Abbasids rose, we must first understand why the Umayyads fell. The Umayyads had expanded the Islamic Empire at an unprecedented rate, stretching from the Atlantic Ocean to the Indus River. But this vast empire came at a cost. Arab favoritism, non-Arab Muslims, Mawali, were treated as second-class citizens. Heavy taxation, Persian and Berber populations bore the financial burden, while Arab elites thrived. Religious tension. Many believed the Umayyads lacked true Islamic legitimacy, ruling more like kings than caliphs. Even among Arab Muslims, resentment was growing. The ruling family lived in luxury in Damascus, while warriors and settlers on the frontiers saw little reward for their conquests. Historian Hugh Kennedy, an expert on medieval Islamic politics and author of The Great Arab Conquests, explains, "The Umayyads were skilled administrators and military leaders, but their policies alienated large sections of their population, particularly non-Arab Muslims who felt marginalized. And as history has shown time and time again, when an empire forgets its people, revolution is inevitable." Historian Patricia Crone, in Slaves on Horses, The Evolution of the Islamic Polity, writes, "The Abbasid Revolution was in many ways a Persian revolution against Arab dominance, an event that permanently reshaped the ethnic and cultural identity of the Islamic world. For years, the Abbasid family had been quietly building support, using a network of underground missionaries, dais, but they needed a spark to ignite full-scale revolution. That spark came in the year 747 AD in the province of Khorasan, modern-day Iran and Central Asia. Here, a man named Abu Muslim, a brilliant and ruthless strategist, rose as the leader of the Abbasid cause. On a fateful night, Abu Muslim raised the Abbasid banner, a simple black flag symbolizing justice and revolution. His message was clear: God has given us a sign. The time of the Umayyads is over. This was no ordinary rebellion. The Abbasids strategically built alliances across different social groups, Persians and Mawali seeking equality and an end to Arab dominance, Shia Muslims hoping for a ruler from the Prophet's family. Historian G.R. Horting, in the First Dynasty of Islam, the Umayyad Caliphate, 661 to 750, notes, the Abbasids initially exploited Shia grievances to gain support, but once in power, they aligned themselves firmly with Sunni orthodoxy, distancing themselves from their former allies. The Abbasids also seek alliances among discontented Arab tribes, frustrated with Umayyad corruption, and most crucially, Abu Muslim's army was not just a ragtag militia, it was a disciplined, well-trained force. Historian Chase F. Robinson, in Empires and Elites After the Muslim Conquest, explains Abu Muslim transformed local grievances into a coordinated military campaign that ultimately dismantled Umayyad rule across the empire. The Abbasid Revolution had begun. Their army swept through the empire like wildfire. One by one, Umayyad strongholds fell. In 748 AD, the Abbasids seize Merv, crushing Umayyad resistance in the east. Year later, in 749 AD, they capture Kufa, declaring Abu al-Abbas as the new caliph. And in 750 AD, the final battle takes place on the Great Zab River, Iraq. Here, the last Umayyad caliph, Marwan II, made his final stand. But the Abbasids were relentless. The Umayyad army collapsed, and Marwan was forced to flee. He was eventually hunted down and killed in Egypt. The Abbasids had won, but their victory was not just about seizing power, it was about erasing their enemies. Historian Richard Bulliet, in The Patricians of Nishapur, a study in medieval Islamic social history, writes, the Abbasid purge of the Umayyads was ruthless, ensuring that no rival faction could threaten their rule in the Islamic East. The Abbasids carried out one of the bloodiest purges in Islamic history. Every living member of the Umayyad royal family was hunted down and executed, except for one. Against all odds, one Umayyad prince escaped, Abd al-Rahman I. Fleeing across North Africa, he narrowly avoided death at every turn. Finally, he reached Al-Andalus, today Spain, where he established a rival Umayyad kingdom. This new Umayyad emirate of Córdoba would never accept Abbasid rule. For centuries, it stood as a challenge to Abbasid legitimacy, a reminder that the Umayyads were not entirely erased. And so, the Islamic world split. While the Abbasids ruled from Baghdad, the Umayyads built a golden age in Spain, a rival Islamic empire that would last for 800 years. Historian David Cook, in Martyrdom in Islam, furthermore notes, the brutality with which the Abbasids eliminated the Umayyads showed their determination to establish an entirely new order, leaving no possibility of Umayyad revival in the east. With their victory secured, the Abbasids set their sights on the future. Unlike the Umayyads, they promised to rule for all Muslims, not just the Arabs, but they also needed a new capital, a city that would symbolize their new empire. That city would be Baghdad, and it would become the greatest city in the medieval world. The Abbasids changed the course of Islamic history. They promised equality, knowledge, and a new era of rule. But power is never permanent, and what they built would one day fall. Up next, how Baghdad became the center of the world and how it was lost forever. Historian Bernard Lewis, in The Middle East, A Brief History of the Last 2,000 Years, states, the Abbasid dynasty was built on a foundation of both political savvy and ruthless efficiency, qualities that would define their rule for centuries. Historian Hugh Kennedy, in The Court of the Caliphs, When Baghdad Ruled the Muslim World, writes, The Abbasid rise to power was the defining moment in Islamic history, marking the transition from an Arab empire to a truly cosmopolitan Islamic civilization. It is 762 AD, and a city unlike any other is being built, a city that will become the intellectual and cultural heart of the world, a city that will transform the Abbasid Caliphate into an empire of knowledge and power. This is Baghdad, the jewel of the Islamic Golden Age. Founded by Caliph al-Mansur, Baghdad was not just another city, it was a statement of Abbasid ambition, a new capital that would surpass everything that came before it. Historian Hugh Kennedy, an expert on early Islamic history and author of The Prophet and the Age of the Caliphates, writes, "Baghdad was not merely the seat of government. It was a deliberate masterpiece of urban planning, designed to project Abbasid power and cultural dominance over the Islamic world. But why did the Abbasids build a brand new capital, and how did Baghdad become the greatest city of the medieval world? But why Baghdad? Why would the Abbasids abandon Damascus, the capital of the Umayyads, or Kufa, where they first seized power? The answer lies in strategy. Historian Marshall Hodgson, in The Venture of Islam, explains, by shifting the center of power from Damascus to Baghdad, the Abbasids emphasized their break from Arab tribal dominance and embraced a broader, more cosmopolitan empire that included Persians and non-Arabs. Baghdad was perfectly positioned. It sat at the heart of the Abbasid Empire, linking Asia, Africa, and Europe. It was close to Persian and Indian trade routes, making it a hub for commerce. It was built on the Tigris River, providing natural defenses and easy transportation. If the Abbasids wanted to be wealthy, they needed to control global trade, and Baghdad was the perfect place to do it. Historian Gordon Newby, in a concise encyclopedia of Islam, states, Baghdad's position at the heart of the Islamic world made it an inevitable center for trade, governance, and intellectual exchange, rivaling Constantinople and Chang'an in its grandeur. Unlike Damascus, which was heavily influenced by Arab tribal politics, Baghdad was in a neutral location. It was far from Umayyad loyalists and from rebellious provinces. Its circular fortress design would make it one of the most defensible cities in history. Historian Chase F. Robinson, in Islamic Civilization in 30 Lives, notes, Al-Mansur's Baghdad was not just a political capital, it was a symbol of a new world order, an empire rooted in Persian, Hellenistic, and Islamic traditions. The Abbasids wanted to send a clear message. They were not the Umayyads. This was a new dynasty, and it needed a new center of power. Baghdad was chosen to reflect Persian and Mesopotamian influences, connecting the Abbasids to ancient civilizations like Babylon and Sassanid Persia. It was designed to be not just a political capital, but a cultural beacon for the Islamic world. This was not just a city. It was the Abbasid dream made real. With the location chosen, construction began in 762 AD. Al-Mansur brought the greatest minds of the empire, Persian engineers, Arab architects, Byzantine craftsmen, to create a city unlike any other. Baghdad was designed to be a masterpiece of urban planning, built in a way that symbolized Islamic order and divine harmony. Baghdad's most famous feature, it was a perfect circle, a revolutionary design for a medieval city. The city's diameter stretched 2.5 kilometers, 1.5 miles, across. A massive double wall surrounded it with 4 heavily fortified gates. Roads were laid out in precise geometric symmetry, radiating outward like the spokes of a wheel. At the center of this circle, the Golden Gate Palace, where the Caliph himself ruled. Hugh Kennedy notes, Baghdad was not merely a capital, it was a projection of Abbasid ambition and a physical embodiment of their authority, drawing the resources and talents of a diverse empire into its orbit. Historian Jonathan Bloom, in Paper Before Print, The History and Impact of Paper in the Islamic World writes, the circular layout of Baghdad was inspired by Sasanian Persian urban planning, reinforcing Abbasid claims to both spiritual and imperial legitimacy. This wasn't just about urban planning, it was about symbolism. The caliph at the center represented God's divine order. The roads extending outward represented the spread of Islam. The mighty walls symbolized the strength of the Abbasid state. It was a city built for eternity. Historian Oleg Grabar, in The Formation of Islamic Art, notes, Baghdad was a living testament to the Abbasid vision, blending Islamic traditions with the architectural and artistic sophistication of Persian and Byzantine influences. By 766 AD, Baghdad was complete, and within a few decades it exploded into the largest, wealthiest, and most advanced city in the world. By the 9th century, Baghdad's population reached 1 million people, unheard of in medieval times. The city became home to traders from China, scholars from India, merchants from Africa, and diplomats from Europe. The Grand Bazaar of Baghdad became the economic hub of the Silk Road, Indian Ocean, and Mediterranean trade routes. If you were a merchant, a scholar, or an artist in the medieval world, Baghdad was the place to be. Historian David A. King, an expert on Islamic science and author of world maps for finding the direction and distance to Mecca, states, Baghdad was not only a political capital, but an intellectual powerhouse that nurtured generations of scholars, astronomers, and mathematicians. But Baghdad was not just about wealth and power, it was about knowledge. At the heart of this intellectual revolution was the House of Wisdom, Bait al-Hikmah, founded in the early 9th century. It became the greatest library and academy of its time. Scholars translated and preserved Greek, Persian, and Indian texts into Arabic. Mathematicians like al-Khwarizmi invented algebra. Doctors like Ibn Sina wrote medical texts that were used in Europe for centuries. Baghdad wasn't just a city, it was the beating heart of human civilization. For 500 years, Baghdad would remain the greatest city in the world. It was a center of power, trade, and knowledge, the crown jewel of the Islamic Golden Age. But no empire lasts forever, and in 1258 AD the Mongols would come. They would burn the city, destroy its knowledge, and end an era of enlightenment. Baghdad was born as a dream, but one day it would become a nightmare. Historian Michael Bonner, in Aristocratic Violence and Holy War, Studies in the Jihad and the Arab-Byzantine Frontier, writes, the Abbasid Caliphs, once the most powerful rulers in the world, became mere religious figures as real power shifted to military commanders and foreign dynasties. Historian Bernard Lewis, in The Middle East, A Brief History of the Last 2,000 Years, writes, Baghdad's rise and fall mirror the cycles of history, how great civilizations ascend, flourish, and eventually decline, but leave behind ideas that endure for centuries. Though the Abbasids are long gone, Baghdad remains eternal, a city whose impact on history can never be erased. It is the 9th century, and at the heart of Baghdad, something extraordinary is happening. Inside a magnificent palace, scholars from across the known world, Muslims, Christians, Jews, Persians, Greeks, and Indians, gather to translate, debate, and discover. They are not just copying knowledge, they are expanding it, reshaping it, and making breakthroughs that will change history. This place is called the House of Wisdom, Bait al-Hikmah. Historian Dimitri Gutas, an expert on Islamic intellectual history and author of Greek thought, Arabic culture, writes, the translation movement in the House of Wisdom was not just an act of preservation, it was a revolution in human thought, transforming ancient knowledge into something entirely new. And this era, it is the golden age of Islam, a time when Baghdad was the center of the world's greatest intellectual revolution. For nearly 300 years, the Abbasid Caliphate would lead the world in science, medicine, mathematics, philosophy, and literature. The discoveries made here would later fuel the European Renaissance, shaping everything from modern medicine to space exploration. So how did this incredible era of progress begin? And how did it all come crashing down? This is the story of the Abbasid Golden Age. The Abbasids understood something revolutionary. Knowledge was power. Unlike the Umayyads, who focused on military expansion, the Abbasids wanted to conquer the world through learning. Under Caliph Harun al-Rashid, 786 to 809 AD, Baghdad became a city that welcomed knowledge from all corners of the earth. And under his son, Al-Ma'mun, 813 to 833 AD, that dream became reality. Al-Ma'mun was obsessed with wisdom. He believed that all knowledge, no matter where it came from, was valuable, so he sent emissaries to the Byzantine Empire asking for the ancient Greek texts of Plato, Aristotle, and Ptolemy. He hired translators from Persia, India, and even China, ensuring that every discovery was preserved, studied, and expanded upon, and he built the House of Wisdom, the greatest intellectual center of the medieval world. Historian George Saliba, an expert in Islamic science and author of Islamic Science and the Making of the European Renaissance, states, "The House of Wisdom was the intellectual engine of the Abbasid Empire, a place where knowledge was not just collected, but actively expanded upon." The House of Wisdom wasn't just a library, it was the world's first modern research institute. Here the Abbasids gathered, translated, and improved upon the greatest works of Greek, Persian, Indian, and Chinese civilizations. Greek philosophical texts, such as Aristotle's Metaphysics and Plato's Republic, were translated into Arabic. Indian mathematical concepts, including the concept of zero and the decimal system, were adopted and improved upon. Persian scientific writings influenced alchemy, medicine, and astronomy. George Saliba writes, "The Abbasid translation movement was not merely an act of preservation, it was a reinvention of ancient wisdom, transforming it into something even greater." Historian Montgomery Watt, in The Influence of Islam on Medieval Europe, furthermore explains, "The Islamic scholars did not merely copy Greek knowledge, they critically analyzed, refined, and expanded it, setting the foundation for modern science." By the 10th century, Baghdad had become the largest and most sophisticated knowledge center in the world. And this explosion of knowledge led to some of the most important discoveries in history. Historian Hassan Massoud, author of Science and Islam, A History, writes, "The scholars of the Abbasid era laid the foundation for the Renaissance. Their ideas, transmitted to Europe centuries later, shaped the scientific revolution." Historian G. Yvonne Grunebaum in Medieval Islam notes, "Unlike medieval Europe, the Abbasids saw no contradiction between science and faith. They believed understanding the natural world was a way to understand God's creation." One of the most famous minds of this era was Al-Khwarizmi, the father of algebra. He developed Al-Jabr, the foundation of modern algebra. He introduced Arabic numerals, which replaced the cumbersome Roman system in Europe. His name, Al-Khwarizmi, gave us the word algorithm. Without his discoveries, modern computers would not exist today. Historian Jim al-Khalili, in The House of Wisdom, How the Arabs Transformed Western Civilization, explains, Al-Khwarizmi's work was more than mathematics. It was a complete restructuring of how numbers could be used to solve complex problems. The Abbasids revolutionized medicine, creating the first hospitals that treated patients regardless of wealth or status. One of the greatest medical minds was Ibn Sina, Avicenna, whose book, The Canon of Medicine, became the standard medical textbook in Europe for 600 years. Doctors under the Abbasids diagnosed infectious diseases like tuberculosis and smallpox, invented surgical tools that are still in use today, pioneered mental health treatments, establishing the first psychiatric wards in hospitals. Dimitri Gutas explains, the Abbasid era laid the foundation for modern medicine, influencing both Islamic and Western medical traditions for centuries. Historian Jonathan Lyons, in The House of Wisdom, How the Arabs Saved Western Civilization, notes, without the Abbasid medical revolution, the foundations of modern healthcare in both the East and the West would not exist. The Abbasids built massive observatories to study the universe, making groundbreaking discoveries. Al-Biruni calculated the Earth's circumference with astonishing accuracy. Al-Sufi created the first detailed star maps. Astronomers proposed that the Earth rotated on its axis, centuries before Galileo. Without these discoveries, modern astronomy would not exist. Historian Toby Huff, in The Rise of Early Modern Science, Islam, China and the West, states, Islamic astronomers of the Abbasid era did more than observe the stars. They fundamentally changed our understanding of the universe. The Abbasids were also brilliant inventors. One of the greatest minds was Al-Jazari, an engineer who designed automated machines, early precursors to robots. Water clocks that kept time with incredible precision, irrigation systems that improved agriculture. His work laid the foundation for mechanical engineering and robotics. For centuries, the Abbasid Caliphate was the greatest center of knowledge in the world, but no empire lasts forever. By the 11th century, the Golden Age began to fade. Political instability weakened the empire. Religious conservatism led to resistance against science and philosophy. Foreign invasions, including the Crusades and Mongol threats, drained resources. And then, in 1258 AD, the unthinkable happened. The Mongols arrived at Baghdad's gates. They would burn the House of Wisdom, destroy its libraries and kill its scholars. The Golden Age was over. Historian Bernard Lewis, in The Arabs in History, explains, the fall of the Abbasid Golden Age was not due to a lack of intelligence or creativity, but political instability, external invasions, and economic decline. Historian David Morgan, in The Mongols, concludes, the destruction of Baghdad in 1258 was not just a military conquest, it was the symbolic death of a civilization that had once led the world. Stay with us to the end, where we will explore the bloody fell of Baghdad in detail. But the knowledge of the Abbasids did not die. It was carried to Europe, India and beyond, influencing every major civilization. The Abbasid Golden Age changed the world forever, and its legacy still lives on today. For nearly 2 centuries, the Abbasid Caliphate stood as the most powerful empire on earth. From the Atlantic Ocean to the Indus River, it controlled vast lands, massive trade routes, and the greatest intellectual centers of the medieval world. But no empire lasts forever. By the 10th century, the Abbasids began to weaken. Rebellions and revolts spread across the empire. Rival dynasties emerged, each claiming power for themselves, and as caliphs lost control, the empire shrank piece by piece. This is the story of how the Abbasid Caliphate fragmented, leading to its final collapse in 1258 AD. The Abbasids once ruled a united empire, but by the 900s, cracks began to form. While the Abbasids ruled from Baghdad, their old enemies, the Umayyads, were still alive. One Umayyad prince, Abd al-Rahman I, had escaped the Abbasid purge in 750 AD and fled to Spain, Al-Andalus. There, he built a rival Umayyad emirate in Cordoba, completely independent from Abbasid rule. By the 10th century, Cordoba was one of the most advanced cities in the world, rivaling Baghdad in culture, trade, and scholarship. Historian Hugh Kennedy, an expert on early Islamic history and author of Muslim Spain and Portugal, A Political History of Al-Andalus, writes, the Umayyad rulers of Cordoba, by creating a parallel Islamic empire in the West, highlighted the Abbasids' failure to maintain true unity over the Muslim world. The biggest challenge to Abbasid power came from North Africa in 909 AD. A new Shia dynasty, the Fatimids, rose in Tunisia and declared themselves the true caliphs of Islam. Unlike the Abbasids, who followed Sunni Islam, the Fatimids claimed descent from Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad, a direct challenge to Abbasid legitimacy. By 969 AD, the Fatimids seized Egypt and founded Cairo, making it their new capital. They built Al-Azhar University, which became a center of Islamic learning. They took control of Mecca and Medina, the holiest cities in Islam. And for over 200 years, they ruled as rival caliphs, directly challenging Abbasid authority. Historian Marina Rustow, an expert on Islamic history and author of The Lost Archive, Traces of a Caliphate in a Medieval Synagogue, notes, the Fatimids did not just represent a religious alternative to the Abbasids. They posed an administrative and economic challenge that ultimately drained the Abbasid state. By the mid-10th century, Abbasid caliphs still ruled in name, but real power had fallen into the hands of warlords and military commanders. In 945 AD, a Persian military dynasty, the Bumayyads, marched into Baghdad and took control of the government. The caliphs were not deposed, but they were reduced to figureheads. The Bumayyads ruled as amirs of amirs, commanders of commanders, controlling the empire behind the scenes. The Abbasid caliphs now had no real power. They were puppets. Historian Patricia Crone, a leading scholar in Islamic political thought and author of God's Rule, Government and Islam, explains, the Bumayyad takeover signaled the Abbasids' transformation from an empire to a mere religious institution, while real power shifted to local military dynasties. Then, in the 11th century, a new power emerged, the Seljuk Turks. The Seljuks were a powerful Sunni Muslim dynasty from Central Asia. Unlike the Bumayyads, they were loyal to Sunni Islam and saw the Abbasids as legitimate spiritual leaders. In 1055 AD, the Seljuks invaded Baghdad, overthrew the Bumayyads, and restored the Abbasid caliphs, but only as symbolic leaders. Historian C.E. Bosworth, a specialist in Persianate history and author of The History of the Seljuk Turks, writes, the Seljuks saved the Abbasid Caliphate from total collapse, but, in doing so, turned the caliphs into nothing more than religious figureheads under their rule. By the 13th century, the Abbasids had clung to power, but in the 1250s, their final enemy arrived, the Mongols. Historian David Morgan, an authority on Mongol history and author of The Mongols, describes the invasion. For the Abbasids, the Mongol invasion was not just a military defeat, it was the complete annihilation of their civilization as they knew it. Baghdad, once the greatest city in the world, was reduced to ashes. The Abbasid Empire was gone, but its legacy lived on. Historian Bernard Lewis, in The Middle East, A Brief History of the Last 2,000 Years, states, though politically weakened, the Abbasid legacy in law, culture, and intellectual thought continued to shape the Islamic world long after their empire had fallen. And so, while the Abbasid era ended, its influence endured, shaping the future of Islamic civilization for centuries to come. It is January 1258 AD, and a dark shadow looms over Baghdad. For 500 years, the Abbasid Caliphate has stood as the beating heart of the Islamic world. Its capital, Baghdad, is the largest and most advanced city on earth, a metropolis of traders, scholars, and poets. The House of Wisdom, filled with the knowledge of centuries, stands at the center of a golden age. But that golden age is about to end forever. Riding toward the city is the most feared army in history, the Mongols. Led by Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, they have already burned cities, shattered empires, and left millions dead. Now, Baghdad is their next target. The Abbasid Caliph, Al-Mustasim, refuses to surrender. But what he does not know is that this is not just another siege. This is the final chapter of the Abbasid Empire, and what happens next will change the course of history forever. By the mid-13th century, the Mongols were unstoppable. From China to Eastern Europe, they had built the largest land empire in history, conquering kingdoms with ruthless efficiency. Now, their leader, Munkar Khan, had given his younger brother, Hulagu Khan, a mission: destroy the Muslim world's greatest city, Baghdad. But why Baghdad? Baghdad was the most important city in the Middle East, a trade hub, a religious center, and the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate. Controlling Baghdad meant controlling the Silk Road and the heart of Islamic civilization. According to historian David Morgan, an expert on Mongol history and author of The Mongols, Baghdad was not only a symbol of Islamic civilization, but a vital economic artery. Its fall would send shockwaves throughout the Muslim world. The Mongols saw the Abbasid caliphs as obstacles to their rule. Previous Abbasid leaders had ignored or insulted Mongol envoys. To the Mongols, this was a grave offense, one that could only be repaid with total annihilation. Paul Buell, a specialist in Mongol military history, notes in The A to Z of the Mongol World Empire, the Mongols viewed defiance as an unforgivable sin. Cities that resisted faced total destruction, as a reminder to others who might think of defying Mongol rule. The Mongols did not just want to defeat the Abbasids, they wanted to send a message. They had already crushed the Khwarezmian Empire in Persia and destroyed dozens of cities. Now they would wipe Baghdad off the map to show that no one was safe from Mongol power. As Peter Jackson, author of The Mongols and the Islamic World, explains, the sack of Baghdad was more than military conquest. It was psychological warfare. The Mongols intended to make an example of the city, ensuring that no Muslim ruler dared oppose them again. On January 29th, 1258, the Mongol siege of Baghdad began. The Caliph, Al-Mustasim, had been warned. His advisors begged him to raise an army, to fortify the walls, to negotiate for peace. But Al-Mustasim was overconfident. For centuries, Baghdad had never been taken by force. The city had massive stone walls, well-guarded gates, and a population of over 1 million people. Surely, he believed, God would protect the Abbasid Caliphate. But the Mongols had never failed to take a city before, and they were experts in siege warfare. Hulagu Khan surrounded Baghdad on all sides, cutting off all food and water supplies. Mongol siege engineers, trained in China and Persia, built giant catapults capable of smashing through stone walls. Bridges were destroyed, preventing reinforcements from arriving. Inside the city, panic spread. Historian John Mann, author of Genghis Khan, Life, Death and Resurrection, describes the siege tactics. The Mongols had mastered the art of total war. Their engineers, recruited from Persia and China, could reduce any fortress to rubble within days. Instead of preparing for battle, Al-Mustasim hesitated. He tried to negotiate, sending envoys to Hulagu Khan. But the Mongols did not want peace. They wanted total destruction. According to David Nicol, author of The Mongol Warlords, Al-Mustasim's indecision cost him the city. Had he mounted a real defense, Baghdad might have survived. Instead, he underestimated the Mongols' brutality. For 12 days, Mongol catapults bombarded the walls. Finally, on February 10th, 1258, a breach was made. The Mongols stormed the city. The fall of Baghdad in 1258 AD marked the end of the Islamic Golden Age. The Mongols had shattered the greatest city of its time, but they could not destroy its legacy. The Abbasids survived in Cairo, where they became symbolic caliphs under Mamluk rule. Meanwhile, new powers rose from the ashes. The Ottoman Empire would later claim the Abbasid mantle. The Mongols themselves would convert to Islam within a century, but the world would never be the same. Baghdad, once the center of the world, had fallen, and history had entered a new age. For 5 centuries, the Abbasid Caliphate stood at the heart of the Islamic world, a beacon of knowledge, culture, and power. From revolution to golden age, from triumph to catastrophe, it shaped the course of history like few empires before or since. But as we've seen, no empire lasts forever. Baghdad, once the shining capital of the world, was reduced to ashes in 1258 AD. The Abbasids fell, but their legacy did not die. The knowledge they preserved fueled the Renaissance. Their institutions inspired future civilizations, and their story still echoes across time. And that is why history matters. It teaches us how power is won and lost, how ideas can outlive empires, and how no civilization is immune to the forces of time. If this journey through the Abbasid Caliphate fascinated you, we have more stories to explore. Watch The Lost History of Early Islam, where we challenge traditional narratives and examine the origins of Islam through a critical lens. Or dive into the era before the Abbasids in The Rise and Fall of the Umayyad Caliphate, the dynasty they overthrew. Click on the videos on screen now to continue uncovering history's forgotten past. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep history alive.